One of the questions that comes up as you kind of delve more into this is what really can you do with CSS? And one of the things that we were looking at before when we were playing around with this JavaScript thing is that we can load in images, and CSS can basically fill in that space with a white border. It can have these little edges. It can also make that gray transparent background behind it. But what happens when you want to change it? When do you know that you can do something with CSS or you can't do something with CSS? And that's it's not really a answerable question in terms of a single paragraph. But I did want to start you thinking about people that are specializing in it. And Leah Veru is one of those specialists. She's been um, well, she's been doing amazing things for years now, but she's been lucky enough to work at the W3C, where she kind of pushed a lot of the new direction for CSS and really what it should be doing. And what that's enabled a lot of people to do is um, start being a lot more creative with how CSS can develop and what it can do in future. If you could look at her Twitter account, she's got heaps of tweets that basically talk about what potential things are being implemented by the various browsers. We've discussed this previously, that a browser, whether it's Chrome or Safari or Firefox, the people who make it decide what they're going to take on board. So if they're going to have CSS, fantastic. What is that CSS going to do? Is it going to be compliant to all the standards, or is it going to go over and beyond what the standards are? And so we've looked at prefixes and how we can include some of those things currently. And what all of these wonderful people do around the world is they push the boundaries of what CSS is and introduce new things. Now, if you're going to go down that route and really get interested in this, then Leah's actually released a book. She's got a book on CSS secrets. Again, full of things that most of the time you wouldn't even think of. It's a little bit dear if you're trying to buy it. These are all US prices, but the whole idea behind it is it goes through specific tips and tricks on how to do things to avoid problems. And even though it was published back in 2015, it still has a lot of information in it which is very useful to get your head around, because all the foundational fundamental things that CSS does come with limitations, and understanding those limitations means that you can do some really cool stuff around them, as well as be very creative on how you can extend what you think it should do, and start being vocal about that and saying, yes, I do want that to be included, here's how I see that working, etc., etc. Going back in time, and I'm going to get the number wrong, but let's just say 30 years or whatever it was, there was no image tag in HTML. HTML didn't want images. As internet was really slow, it wasn't really something that people could afford to have on their pages, so it was just text and no CSS either. But with the advent of faster internet and with the advent of the Netscape browser, there was a proposition made that we should actually have images on our web pages. And realistically, looking back at that, that was a pivotal moment for when a lot of this stuff changed. So don't discount your ability to put forward things that a language should have, but also don't reinvent the wheel. So if you can look at people who are really innovating and learn from those people, that's a really good place to start, and that's a really cool kind of area to look at. So going back to what we were doing here and looking specifically at different kind of bits in CSS we've set up, understanding that the C in CSS stands for cascading is really important as well, and looking at things like this box that we've created being the same box across these various pages, we can actually go and modify it in some way. And the way that we might modify it, and you know, you can do this if you want to kind of follow along in Dreamweaver if you want, but just to modify it here, we can actually do a lot of things around its width and its height. And so we can basically say, look, I want this to be 400 wide, but what we're doing is we're affecting just this version of it if we want to, because CSS, if it's included within the page and it's included after you've loaded in the main style sheet, only affects this aspect of it, which is really how this particular JavaScript widget that we looked at here for the gallery works. It's modifying something on the page as the page is kind of rendered and appeared. And those are some applications of what you can do. But at the same time, you have some consistency across your pages because you start from the same point. And I think that's where I wanted just to kind of preface us delving deeper into CSS, so that you don't need to necessarily just follow along. You can delve deeper into the whole subject matter, learn from the experts, and as a designer, CSS is fundamentally going to be more interesting to you than HTML is. HTML is structural. It's there for the integrity of the page. It's there to give it valid meaning to the content, not necessarily aesthetic and design aspects which we're used to kind of working with. So you get to a point where these two languages don't do the job, and that's where we've kind of kludged some things in with JavaScript, and that's fine. But when you look back at what the languages themselves have done, CSS and HTML have grown a lot to try and take some of that work away from JavaScript. And we played around when we were doing these little circles here, especially with what that can, what can we already do without having to do much work. So I'm going to leave it here, but what we'll do tomorrow is we'll have a look at CSS in a bit more detail, and we'll try and understand how to create some things with CSS a little bit more, and hopefully you're still kind of following along and enjoying these. But I just wanted to kind of take a pause and have a look at this, because I know we just powered into looking at Lightbox, but that's the segue, and that's an optional extra, nothing that we expect for you to actually have to do. So nice to have, but that's about it. Alright, talk to you guys next time. Bye.